Twice the body sculpt, twice the tightness. You know what? I take it back. It's not 2099 Spider-Man that we need to see more in cinematic form. It's Ben Reilly. I mean, we really have not legitimately gotten a single Ben Reilly adaptation except outside of the comics. Maybe a couple times in some animated series, although I don't remember him from the original 90s animated series. But Marvel Legends, with their new retro card, decided to tackle the Ben Reilly Spider-Man, not to be confused with the Scarlet Spider. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with Ben Reilly, he is basically a clone of Peter Parker. Potential spoilers there, I'm sorry, but that's pretty much his background, except instead of being the anti-hero or the enemy of Peter Parker like he was originally designed to be, he instead says, you know what, screw this, I'm gonna go my own way, but also at the same time kind of adapt what I was kind of molded to be, which is this new version of Spider-Man. And Marvel Legends decided to make a figure out of his take on the Spider-Man mantle as opposed to being the Scarlet Spider. Scarlet Spider usually has a much more ragtag design to him where he's mostly blue and he's got like the torn up hoodie with the sleeves removed and he's got that kind of offshoot, homemade kind of look. This is meant to be more so of his official Spider-Man suit, as him being dubbed officially Spider-Man and not Scarlet Spider. And this is pretty much his suit. It stays predominantly blue and red. However, you can definitely see that he's gotten much more, I guess you could say, theatrical aspects to his suit, predominantly the spider symbol on the front and on the back. It almost kind of reminds me a little bit of the symbiote suit symbol on his chest and back that kind of encroaches and wraps around his shoulders, around his abdomen, and kind of trails on over to his back, except this time it still kind of models itself after Spidey with the black motif. Overall though, I really do like this version of the suit. I've actually always liked this version of the suit because it kind of blends in the old with the new. You got the classic Spidey kind of motif and color palette, while at the same time being very significant that this is not your traditional Spidey. And I know that it's feeling like I'm not deserved in saying this, but it almost even kind of reminds me of the PS4 Spider-Man that we just recently had, especially around the leg area, because the majority of the legs are just straight up forward blue. Even the inside portions of his bottom legs here around the shin area, where you have a little bit of that red, the traditional red boot kind of look, except it's only on the outside. I don't know what it is, but as soon as I took him out of the package, that's actually one of the first things that I noticed and just kind of told myself, I'm like, yeah, it kind of looks like the PS4 Spidey in that regard. Then we move on over to the sleeves. This is where it kind of, I don't want to say it loses me, but it just looks a little off kilter, is that the sleeves are mainly blue, except it just kind of cuts off at the bicep. I don't know how I feel about that 100%. I love the whole torso area with, like I said, the very enlarged spider symbol here kind of wrapping around. It kind of almost reminds me a little bit of Nightwing in that regard. It almost makes me seem like this is the newest generation of that character. Just like Nightwing was to the original Robin, you have this guy versus the original Spidey. Kind of matches neck and neck, at least from the way I perceive it. He's got the silver bands here on his wrists. I guess you could kind of say those are his web shooters. I don't remember if that was exactly his web shooters or if he's got them underneath, but I'm going to go ahead and interpret them as is. And to separate this costume from the original, you also have these fingers where you have only like 3 of the 5 fingers on each hand actually having the red webbed texture look, as opposed to the rest of it, which is pretty much just colored up blue. So you can see right here that he just, you know, when it came to the design of the Ben Reilly Spidey, they kept the palette, but they just kind of changed the sliders around. And for the most part, it works. It's just a couple of moments here and there that I think is just a little strange to, again, trying to make themselves a little too different from that prior version. Outside of that, though, it's traditional Spidey, especially around the head area where you have your traditional kind of look to the Spidey's head and mask, as well as the lenses. I would probably say the only thing that kind of stands out a little bit is the webbing and potentially the head sculpt. Now, why is it that the head sculpt itself here stands out to me specifically? That's because if you couldn't already tell, especially if you're not that avid of a Marvel Legends collector, especially amongst the most recent retro line, is because this is, quite frankly, the exact same body sculpt as the most recent Marvel Legends figure that I covered, at least the very last one, and that is the Black Suited Symbiote Spidey from the Marvel Legends retro line from Hasbro. It's ideally the exact same body type, down to the legs, the arms, the buffed out physique, the chest, the shoulder area, almost everything is quite frankly identical. As soon as I pulled him out, I recognized the body type, and because of that, I was like, yep, I'm practically going to love this figure all the same until we got to the head sculpt. And there's a pro and a con when it comes to said head sculpt, because that's what stood out to me, is that it's actually a legitimate different head than it was on the Symbiote Suit Spidey to, again, differentiate the figures from one another, aside from the typical body sculpt that they reused here. And the pro is that it is in fact a different sculpt altogether. You can kind of feel the lenses protruding out, so it kind of gives it away that it is in fact a different head sculpt than the Symbiote Suit Spidey, to again build out the different kind of physique traits. The negative, I would say, and like I said, it kind of teeters more so on the nitpick side of things because you're not really gonna pay too much attention to this, is this lower section of the head around the jawline, for two reasons. One is that when you move the head up, and we'll tackle articulation here in a moment, you can kind of see it's a little more hollowed out than your other traditional Marvel Legends heads, at least some of the most recent ones on the retro line. And it just looks a little strange. It looks a little hollowed out. It almost looks like a secondary mouth kind of protruding here from his neck. But the reason why I consider that more so a nitpick than anything else is because you're not really going to be posing him looking up this way. If you're going to be moving the head up, you're either going to be crunching him down and having him face forward, or he's just going to be in a completely different pose that it's not really going to draw too much attention to that gaping section in his neck because of the way that his head is hollowed out from underneath. So because of that, it's like, all right, it really is a nitpick that in most situations are not going to call for. The only other thing that stands out to me as far as this jawline being molded a little weird is that when looking at him from the side, you really can't tell, but when you look at him from face forward, you can kind of see it's protruding off to the sides. It's got a bit of a square jawline, and you could attribute this to Ben Reilly's different kind of physique pattern, but because of that, I don't think it worked 100% too well here in figure form, that it just kind of looks like he's crunching at the neck. You know what I'm saying? Like he's making that ugly jizz in my pants kind of face or movement with his neck, and because of that, it just looks like his neck is conjoined to his head altogether here, that it just looks kind of awkward. But like I mentioned, that's the only thing that's different from the Symbiote Suit Spidey, other than that he's pretty much the exact same body mold as that figure, and as such, he's gonna have pretty much the exact same articulation. As somewhat foreshadowed, the head has that exact same ball joint that not only allows it to rotate 360 degrees, but it can also pivot up to show, like I said, that hollowed out section from underneath his chin, but also crunch inwards very well because of the way that that hinge is designed there on the back of his neck. He can also slightly tilt from left to right if you just nudge it the right way, and then the rest of the figure pretty much follows suit. You get to the shoulders, and you of course have the ball joint that is able to allow the arm to rotate 360 degrees vertically as well as extend off to the sides. I would probably say, I don't know if it's just me, maybe I have to pull out Symbiote Suit Spidey, but he can actually extend his arms a little farther out. Maybe they were a little easier on the tightness of the joints on this one in particular. But moving on through, you of course have that joint that I absolutely adore inside of the shoulder via this hinge contraption that allows it to extend from the back all the way to the front very well, like you see there before you. Of course, you're going to have a bicep swivel right above the very enlarged bicep and tricep muscles that allows it to rotate 360 degrees, as well as the two joints on the elbow that sadly don't bend all the way. It's the same issue that I had with Symbiote Suit Spidey, because they are in fact sharing the same model of body type. They're of course going to have the same physique, and the same problem carries on over here where his muscles are just too swole. He's just too massive that he unfortunately cannot bend at the two joints simultaneously. So that's a bit of a bummer for me. But when you move on over to the wrists, they are able to rotate 360 degrees, as well as allow the hinge inside to bend inwards and outwards. I'll probably say that the hinge bending is slightly limited as opposed to Symbiote Suit Spidey because of the way that these armbands are kind of enclosing this entire area right here, so it becomes a bit restrictive. And on a little side note, I don't know if it's just my particular figure here, but I notice that the right arm is able to kind of flush up against the body a little cleaner than the left one. As you see right there, as I kind of press both of them towards the inside of the body, you'll notice the right one can just kind of flesh right here. Left one, not so much. And I don't really see that as being an issue with the muscle type right here around the arm. You know, I don't really see it restricting. There's just less room or wiggle room for the joint that allows the extension in the first place to allow it to go all the way down. So it might just be mine. Then we move to the torso, where, as I've noted in the Symbiote Suit Spidey review, is probably my favorite joint out of this particular body mold. You have the mid-cut torso joint right here that allows it to rotate not only 360 degrees, but also extend all the way to the back like so, exposing a little bit here in the middle, but then crunching inwards very generously, as well as moving and pivoting left to right on the oblique section there. And then once more, you have a waist hinge joint here in the middle that actually blends very well into the red parts of his suit, but is able to then allow more abdominal crunching forwards like so, as well as all the way back like that. From that point forward, the rest kind of follows the same exact pattern as that prior Black Suited Spidey. You have the ball joints at the top of the leg that allow it to move the leg all the way forwards like so, extend off to the sides like that. I'm sorry if I'm kind of breezing through this, but like I said, it's identically the same exact figure, so it's gonna have that same articulation. You have the swivel joints here on the thigh that thankfully do not freeze on over, because I have heard stories from other folks in the comment section saying that theirs were sadly stuck together, and when trying to rotate them, they snapped off. So my condolences to you folks out there, but just, you know, give it a test run first. Don't be too quick to kind of twist any joints that are giving you some resistance. You know, just like they say in the film industry, don't force it. And they're not just talking about equipment, but just don't force anything. Test it out first, and then if things are just not looking all too great, go via the methods of either the hair dryer or the hot boiling water to kind of ease up these joints. Now, when we get to the knees, you of course have the two joints once more that can bend all the way back, at least for the left one. For the right one, it can bend back, but I do notice that the joint just feels overall a little flimsier on my right knee for this particular figure. So if yours comes out the same, do be careful, because a couple of times I kind of bent it in a way where I just felt a little bit of flex on this knee here, and that could pose a risk of the knee breaking. So do be careful with that. And seeing as we're gonna probably have the same issue with the ankles as we had with Symbiote Suit Spidey, because it's the same type, we thankfully have shin swivels here at the top part of the thigh. And of course, it's gonna come off as a little weird when you do move the shin around, not only because of the molding of the shins and the calves themselves, but also because we now have the divided blue and red parts here of the boot. Once we get to the ankles, we then see that problem where you can definitely flex and bend the ankles downwards and upwards like so, but when it comes to rotation, that is not going to happen unless you bend the foot all the way around. Then it could twist. So obviously it's going to have that same issue there, one that thankfully gets fixed via the shin swivels to allow the feet to pivot in any way that you desire. So as you can see, identical to that Black Suited Spidey, but just like I mentioned in that video, the articulation is one of my favorite aspects of it, and here's to hoping that Marvel Legends continues this trend with their foreseeable figures that they got coming out this year. Some of which I even looked at and thought to myself, it looks like they're kind of deviating, but we shall see. We shall see. Maybe I'll be pleasantly surprised with a couple of outings that they have coming down the pipeline. Now, much like Symbiote Suit Spidey, they also decided to omit a few of those web strands for accessories, which, once again, I feel like they could have implemented that here, because since I'm liking the possibility of this figure and the articulation, it would complement those poses that I had in mind very well to have some web strands for stylistic choices. Instead, just like with Symbiote Suit Spidey, they threw in just more hand accessories. Now, I did cheat a little bit here, because some of those accessories or secondary hands they threw in are actually already on the figure, which are these fisted hands. I don't know why, but I just always default to the fist hands when it comes to certain figures, specifically Spidey, because you know, he's ready to go. And frankly, out of all the set, it's the one that looked the most quote-unquote neutral. So because of that, I went ahead and attached the fisted hands onto there. And of course, they're pretty standard fare for Spidey figure. Off to the side, Hasbro decided to throw in extended hands for either wall crawling or action poses, as you can see right there. And it's actually through these hands that you can blatantly see what I was talking about as far as the color stylistic choices, where the majority of the hand is pretty much made out of this blue matte coated paint, with the exception of the pinky, the index finger, and the thumbs on each hand. But looking at them closer, you could probably make the argument that the reason why they went with that is because those are the fingers that he exposes or extends when he's doing the web shooting pose, which he is obviously going to come with the hands to be able to make that pose happen. And of course, swapping out the hands is going to be exactly the same as not only the Symbiote Suit Spidey, but also pretty much any Hasbro figure out there. You just give them a quick tug. They have that identical joint right there, so all you have to do is take any hand and swap it in for the other. Now, one other little side note though, just a word of caution, is that these bands right here around the wrist are also removable. They're not glued or adhesive onto the wrist themselves. They can come off as well, which is a nice little detail, but at the same time it causes for concern when it comes to losing any of these pieces if you want to keep them close and on the ready. However, if you do not have any kind of fancy for these wristbands, you could remove them and simply just have the hand be put back on there via the joint, like with other figures. And as you can see right there, he's ready to go. But of course, like I mentioned before, you can make the argument that that band is made to be his web shooter. So for posterity, let's go ahead and put it back on. So retroactively, I did, looking back now at this review, cover what is essentially a repaint, which I kind of made a little bit of a stir when I made a community post recently tackling a certain McFarlane figure I discovered to simply just be a repaint of a Joker using a different head. I am completely aware that not only McFarlane Toys, but also Hasbro with their Marvel Legends, as well as various other toy companies, tackle repaints. However, I understand that certain repaints do call onto my attention because they're utilizing a body type that I absolutely love. And that is the case very much here with Ben Reilly Spider-Man. They're reusing the Black Suited Spider-Man figure that I absolutely adored from a few weeks back. And as such, I'm going to be loving this figure as well, despite the little caveat with the specific and differentiated head mold here. Other than that, I don't like it when they decide to use a body that I didn't really find myself really loving or had very significant issues with, such as that Joker, where I was under the impression we were going to get a brand new figure, and then when I saw him finally in store, it was a completely different one. That is why I was kind of flustered, and I made that community post. So that's pretty much where I stood on that Joker, and many others were saying, you know, are you brand new to this? No, you know, I've been collecting figures for literally decades now, and I'm no stranger to repaints, and I can genuinely love repaints, as this video now pretty much testifies this, as the Ben Reilly Suit Spider-Man figure here is frankly also one of my favorites. And even knowing this, I would say that if you are a fan of this particular color scheme for the suit and the Ben Reilly character as a whole, then I definitely still recommend adding this to your Marvel Legends retro collection. And if you want to do so, be sure to use the affiliate links in the description. They help out the channel quite a bit. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching this video. Check out this other Marvel Legends. Actually, no, check out the review for that Black Suited Spider-Man figure that I covered prior. They're showing up on screen right now. And as always, stay humble. I'll see you guys on the next video.